The Russian Foreign Ministry says the United States has not fulfilled its obligations in implementing the agreements on a cessation of hostilities in southwestern Syria.
The decision recently adopted by the U.S. administration about the allocation of an additional $6.6 million for the so-called White Helmets in Syria makes us wonder how sincerely Washington wants to eradicate terrorism and stabilize the situation in Syria. Much has been said about the White Helmets' questionable activity, which is directly involved in the anti-Syrian information war from the West, particularly when it comes to the organization of chemical provocations with the use of poisonous chemical agents. The U.S. and the coalition headed by them continue to support provocators that operate with terrorists.
Zakharova pointed to the increasing presence of Nusra Front terrorists in the de-escalation zone in southern Syria. She was referring to the terrorist shelling of Daraa and Sueda provinces. Meanwhile, the spokesperson said Russia considers illegitimate the expansion of powers of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. She condemned the move as a result of political manipulations and clear blackmail by UK and other states and direct bribes from other delegations. Members of the OPCW on Wednesday approved the UK proposed draft motion authorizing the organization to attribute responsibility for chemical attacks in Syria. Now, to discuss that more, we are joined from Ontario by Mr. Jason Unruhe, political commentator. Thank you very much, Mr. Unruhe, as always, for joining us. What is your take on this recent development? What do you make of this?
Well, I think it certainly demonstrates that the United States and other imperialist powers are not quite finished with Syria yet. Now, despite the fact that it's very clear that they're going to lose the war for Syria, the side of the Syrian government backed by Russia and Iran are certainly going to win the overall war. It seems that hostilities will continue for the meantime, as the long-term goal has now shifted away from overthrowing the Syrian government to balkanizing the country, using different groups to try to prop up illegitimate governments, or at least to carve up the country into various smaller states that can be used by other imperialist powers. This sudden about-face of the OPCW suddenly deciding that the Syrian government is responsible for frankly, the alleged chlorine attack that took place earlier this year, which shows really no evidence of the attack even really all that taking place. Very strange evidence presented, like people who were already in the hospital before the... There's no actual evidence linking the attack to the Syrian government, but however, chlorine chemicals being found in possession of U.S. and imperialist-backed rebels inside the country, being in possession of the chemicals to perfectly be able to fake attack like that, certainly demonstrates that the OPCW has shifted its position from being an objective investigative body into one that is now politically motivated as well. And this goes against the very nature of what scientific investigation should be. I think that this is almost an act of desperation on the part of the imperialist powers, who do find themselves losing significantly inside the country. The renewed funding for the White Helmets certainly shows that they're still willing to back up many of the forces that already exist in the country, mainly serving as Al-Qaeda's ambulatory service. So I think that the sudden boost of this, the returning to funding the White Helmets inside the country, shows that U.S. and other imperialist countries' foreign policy is definitely still aimed towards trying to harm the Syrian government under the guise of trying to protect the people of Syria, but at the same time has shifted their goal towards the balkanization of the country as opposed to the outright overthrow.
Mr. Unruhe, very quickly, when the foreign ministry, the Russian foreign ministry, says that the United States has not fulfilled this obligation, what exactly do they mean?
Well, they mean that they have not lived up to defunding the hostile groups inside Syria, particularly the U.S., UK, and other imperialist aligned countries funding various terrorist groups inside the country, often so-called moderate rebels, etc. I think that they're definitely referring to the fact that the U.S. has continued to fund them, along with the White Helmets, who do assist the terrorist forces inside the country. I believe that's primarily what they're referring to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jason Unruhe, as always, joining us live from Ontario, giving us his take on the recent developments regarding Syria.